Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our seminar. I'm pleased to introduce you and to have a conversation with Janice Kaplan this morning or this afternoon on how gratitude can transform your life. Welcome, Janice. It's nice to be here to listen to what you have to say.
Thank you.
I'd like to introduce our presenter, Janice Kaplan. She has had an esteemed career as a journalist, a TV producer, and author of 15 popular books, including the New York Times bestseller, The Gratitude Diaries, which we will be talking about today, and her newest book, The Genius of Women. Janice was the editor-in-chief of Parade magazine, also the executive producer of the TV Guide television group, and that's where she created and produced more than 30 primetime network television specials. She has written for dozens of national magazines and websites and has appeared frequently on TV shows, including Today and Good Morning America. And Janice graduated magna cum laude from Yale University and won Yale's Murray Fellowship for her writing. So welcome, Janice. I can't wait to hear what you have to say about gratitude.
Thanks for having me.
Before we start our conversation, I'm sure a lot of you on this webinar already know about this. But want to explain what is a CCRC, which is also known as a continuing care retirement community. It's actually an insurance product, not real estate, where contracts are regulated by the state of operation. Financial performance is reported to the state annually, and you are prepaying and insuring for potential healthcare needs, assisted living, nursing care, and memory support. A portion of your entrance fee and monthly fee are also tax deductible. But the CCRC is also a lifestyle choice, and you would enter independently, which would give you the freedom from your home maintenance chores, also allow you to have transportation, and give you lots of activities, programs, education, performances, and also increased social options. So in this case, you are able to stay in control of your own life. We'll talk about a little bit specifically about Riverwoods. It actually began, as some of you know, as a dream that Mariana Hatch and Rosemary Coffin and a small group of New Hampshire residents had who wanted to create a better way to improve their experience of life for themselves and others as you age. That dream took off today, and almost 30 years later, Riverwoods is a dynamic river family of 3 not-for-profit communities, our Riverwoods Exeter, Manchester, and Durham campus. With the same mission to improve the experience of aging, all are communities that share the same values and are advised by our volunteer board focused on operations. The Riverwoods Group is our supportive organization, and it provides professional fee-based services such as human resources, marketing, information technology, finance, and quality. We can share all of those services. The Riverwoods Group also can fund any at-risk projects that we have within the community and any new ventures. Each community is financially independent and has the opportunity to provide additional funding to Riverwoods Group based on available assets. The Riverwoods Group is advised by a volunteer board of directors who are focused instead on mission and growth. So here's a few housekeeping items here. You are all on mute in this presentation, but we definitely welcome your questions. So in this case, anytime you have a question, please submit it through the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. We will answer all your questions at the end of the presentation. And as usual, we are always looking for suggestions on how to improve our programs. And if you ever have any ideas on topics that you would like to know about, please let us know. Our next online workshop is coming up on Thursday, December 7th, and it's an update on real estate with a guide to off-season selling. So that should be an interesting presentation for this time of year. You can register by clicking on this or by hovering over this QR code, or by going onto our website, riverwoodsgroup.org/events. And so now, without further ado, I would love to introduce you to Janice Kaplan.
Thank you, Chrissy. I appreciate it, and it is a pleasure to be here with you. Everyone, please forgive my slightly gravelly voice. You know, it's that time of year. I woke up with a little bit of a cold, and I was really frustrated this morning, thinking that I wasn't going to get to sound perfect for you. And then I thought, what a great example of how to use gratitude, right? I can't change my voice today, but I can be grateful that I have a voice at all and that I get to be here and I get to talk to you about this really important subject. You know, we are approaching the one holiday of the year that has the word thanks in its title. And we tend to think of gratitude as being about the happy times. Something good happens and you're grateful. But the real secret of gratitude is how it works in really challenging situations. Gratitude helps you turn things around to see the brighter side of any situation. We don't always have control over the things that are going to happen in a day, in our life, or certainly in the world. We can't control when we get a cold, but we do have control of our own attitudes and our own feelings. And if we can move forward with a positive perspective, it truly makes all the difference. And I hope our conversation today will give you some techniques that you can use to feel better and happier no matter what is going on. So I wrote the book, The Gratitude Diaries, a few years ago, and the concept for the book was that I wanted to see what would happen if I spent a year living more gratefully. Nothing unusual occurred in that year. But simply by changing my attitude and my perspective, I ended up with what was probably one of my very best years ever. And I'm so excited to talk to you about this book because I know that all of you at any age or any stage of life can end up with your best year ever too. So give me just one moment here to share my screen with you. And there is the Gratitude Diaries. A little background. I started thinking about gratitude after I left as the editor-in-chief of a big magazine. And I was asked to do a national survey on the topic of gratitude. And the results started coming in, and they were really interesting. And I can ask you to think about some of the questions that particularly intrigued me. We asked, are grateful people happier? So think about that for a second. Are grateful people happier? If you said yes, you're right along with about 90 or 95% of people who we asked who said yes, grateful people are happier. And we said, are you grateful for family and friends? And again, number was crazy high. 95% said yes, absolutely, grateful for family and friends. And then we said, do you express gratitude? Think about that one for a minute. And all of a sudden, the number plunged. And only about 45% of people said that they expressed gratitude. So it was pretty clear to me that we have a gratitude gap. We know that there's something that's going to make us happier, but we don't do it. And closing that gap can make a huge difference in how we feel every day. And because I'm a journalist, I got to go on television and talk about the gratitude gap and sound very smart about it. But at some point, I realized that I was probably as guilty of that as anybody else. And the realization particularly came to me at around this time of year. It was at a New Year's Eve party. And I started thinking about what I could do to make the year ahead really special. I don't know how all of you feel on New Year's Eve, but I tend to feel like the whole world is having a better time than I am. And, you know, I was at a party and somebody turned on the television and we're watching people around the world dancing on the streets and wearing funny hats. And I thought, what would happen in the coming year that would make me want to put on a funny hat and dance in the streets next year? I had a perfectly nice life, but nothing immediately came to mind. So I thought of the obvious. I thought, okay, I could win the lottery, or I could move to a Pacific island. And I thought, okay, yeah, but you know, we're human. We all like to complain. If I win the lottery, I'm probably going to complain next year that my taxes are too high. And if I move to a Pacific island, I'll probably complain that I got sunburned. And so that's when it occurred to me that how I felt about the coming year was going to have less to do with the events that actually happened than with how I thought about them and the attitudes that I brought to them. Because if you wait for events to make you happy, you're probably going to be waiting for a really, really long time. What matters again in terms of our happiness is not the events, but how we respond to them. So that's when I decided to challenge myself and see what would happen if I spent a year living gratefully. So, why gratitude? Well, one study found that gratitude has an almost direct connection to mental health and happiness. It found that close to 20% of the differences in people's happiness is predicted by the amount of gratitude that they actually express. And I expect that right now, especially with all that's going on in the world, all of us could use a 20% boost in our mental health and happiness. When we think about what's going to make us happy, we usually focus on objects. You might like a new car, or you might like a bigger house, or you might like a prettier sweater. But the problem with stuff is that you get used to it. And psychologists refer to it as habituation. And no matter what is it you get, once you have it, it recedes into the background. I started thinking of this as the car in the garage syndrome. After a friend of mine in Los Angeles who spent weeks telling me how much he wanted a Porsche. And all he would talk about was how having a Porsche was going to make his life better. He was going to be so much happier. A Porsche was just what you needed for happiness in Los Angeles. And then he sold one of his screenplays. And you know what he did? He went and he bought that Porsche. And sure enough, for the first couple of days, maybe the first couple of weeks, he was so excited every time he got in the car. It just was everything that he had dreamed of. But then he started driving to work every day. He was in Los Angeles. There was a lot of traffic. He actually got a speeding ticket one day. He got a parking ticket another day. A couple of months went by and he needed to change the oil. Pretty soon, the car was just the car in the garage. And who gets excited about the car in the garage? So what do? Well, I guess you could trade up to a fancier car. That's what most of us think about doing. But the point is, it's never going to work, right? Because whatever you get is going to be the baseline, is going to be what you start to expect. And what becomes so much more important is to be able to focus with pleasure on what you have right now. It doesn't mean that you can't want something else, but it does mean that you recognize that what you have is making you happy also. One advantage of gratitude is that it allows us to see the positives in any situation. And one reason we need to be able to do that is that we actually are wired to have what psychologists refer to as a negativity bias. And think about it in terms of our ancestors. If they were out picking berries in the field, they could get 10 delicious berries, and that was nice. But if they found one poisonous berry, they really needed to know which was the poisonous berry. Otherwise, they did not become our ancestors. So we are all the descendants of the people who are really good at focusing on the negative and knowing what's dangerous and knowing what's wrong. Well, most of us don't have to worry about poisonous berries anymore, but what does that turn into in the current world? Well, if 10 good things happen to you in a day and one bad thing, I guess there's a very good chance that the one you end up talking about that night at dinner is probably the bad thing. And if we don't have gratitude, if we don't add gratitude to our lives as a daily reminder, that negativity bias is going to really start taking over. When I wrote the Gratitude Diaries, I decided that I was going to spend 1 month being grateful for something different. And I decided to start with my husband. Now, I have a very nice husband, but I have also been married for a very long time. And as I'm sure some of you know, or you kind of stop noticing each other. The habituation that we were just talking about with cars is equally true with spouses. And by the way, I think spouses and partners and friends are a little harder to trade in than cars. In that survey I mentioned before, we discovered that people are more likely to say thank you to the people that we casually encounter than to the people that we really care about the most. And why is that? We found that the person who makes your cappuccino is more likely to get a thank you than your best friend. And I think it's because we have a different bar, right? If the person makes your cappuccino and puts that pretty little heart on the top, you're happy. Whereas for a friend or for a spouse or a partner, we all know they could be so much better if they would just listen to us, right? We have such good ideas. And we tend to refer to that as constructive criticism. We hear constructive, and our friends and partners and children hear criticism. So realizing that, I decided to try to spend one weekend dropping all of that constructive criticism and only being positive. I hadn't yet told my husband what I was doing or that I was thinking about spending a year living more gratefully. And so that very first weekend after that New Year's Eve, we're lucky enough to have a house up in Connecticut. And we were driving up to that house on a Friday night. And we arrived, and I turned to my husband and I said, "Honey, thank you for driving." And he said, "I always drive." And I said, "Yeah, I know you always drive, but it's dark, it's snowing. I'm not a good driver. I don't like to drive. And thank you for doing that." He didn't say much. And then in the course of the weekend, I thanked him for all sorts of things that he probably always does, but that I never had particularly noticed. And at the end of the weekend on Sunday night, he turned to me as we were having dinner and he said, "Honey, thank you for cooking." And I said, "I always cook." But then I stopped and I told him what I was doing, and we marveled at how the vibe between us had changed so dramatically just in that one weekend. And when I got back, because I wasn't going to let this just pass by, I started calling various psychologists and neurologists to find out, did this make any sense? Could this actually be happening? And one therapist actually in the Midwest who's done some great research on this said that absolutely, that the neural connections, the neural circuits in our brain actually change depending on how we use them. So if you're using those gratitude circuits, if you're using the thanks and the appreciation, those get stronger. It's just like when you lift weights. Do it once and it doesn't make a big change, but keep doing it and it will make a whole change. You know, the gratitude that works with a partner, a friend, or a spouse is also really important with adult children. There's that issue of constructive criticism again. We have experience. We want to tell our kids how they can be better, what they should know. But children, particularly when they're grown, but really at any age, really mostly want to be appreciated. And if you're able to step back and do that, it makes a huge difference. I often hear people telling me how their children just don't appreciate them and don't appreciate what they do, and they never call or they never visit. And then I'll say, "What's the first thing you say when they call?" And often they'll say, "Well, it's about time you called." Well, if that's what you hear, you may not want to call again. I was lucky enough to have a really terrific mother-in-law who set a fabulous example for me of positivity. And I tried really hard to do that with my own children. And I realized that it worked not long ago when my older son, who's a very busy businessman, was racing between meetings one day, and he called me just to say hi, and we chatted for a few minutes. And at the end, I said to him, "You know, I so appreciate that you call. I know how busy you are, and it means so much." And he stopped and he said, "Mom, every time I call, you tell me how I'm the most wonderful person in the world and how everybody who works with me is so lucky. Why wouldn't I call?" And I guess that's a good question. You want to make it so that's how people feel about you. You're never going to get children or grandchildren at any age to be more grateful by telling them to be more grateful. But modeling gratitude does have an amazing effect. Oh, sorry, that was for that picture. Another topic I wanted to talk to you about was gratitude at work. And I know a lot of you aren't working anymore, but I just found this fascinating that in that same survey, we found that only 9% of people said they expressed gratitude at work, but 81% of people said that they would work harder for a grateful boss. And I think that too many bosses think that they prove their power by not being grateful and not expressing appreciation. Remember that old TV show, Mad Men, where that John Hamm played Don Draper, the ad executive. And in one famous episode, he turned to Peggy, who worked for him, and said, "I don't have to say thank you. I say thank you with a paycheck." And I heard that over and over again from some of the CEOs that I interviewed. And I wanted to say to them, no, you don't say thank you with a paycheck. You say we're paying you with a paycheck. You say thank you with thank you. And I think the CEOs who know that, and the people in any situation who know that, really do so much better. One CEO I spoke to named Doug Conant, who at the time was the chairman of Campbell Soup, or CEO of Campbell Soup, which is why we have some chicken noodle soup here, told me that he noticed that 10% of things go wrong in a company and they get 90% of the attention. And I think that's true in our lives in general, right? If you think about it, once again, we're back to that one poisonous grape and the 10 good ones. 10% of things go wrong, but they do get 90% of the attention. Now, the things that go wrong need to be made right. I understand that. But let's try really hard to remember to celebrate the 90% that go right. Let's try really hard to be grateful for the things that do go well and focus on those and try to talk about those rather than complaining about the other ones. One quick side story about Doug Conant that I found quite moving. At the end of his tenure at Campbell's, he had a terrible accident on the New Jersey Turnpike. And he was actually almost killed. He ended up in the ICU for several weeks. And what I should have mentioned is that one of the things that Doug had done when he was at Campbell's was to try to turn the attitudes of people around by recognizing those things that go right and writing thank you notes to people. And he wrote something like 6 thank you notes a day, every day, handwritten, to people all throughout the company. He told me that by the end of his tenure, he had written 30,000 thank you notes. And when he was in the ICU after that accident, he started getting letters and emails from all over the world. And his wife would sit on the edge of his bed and read them to him. And they said things like, "Dear Doug, you don't know who I am, but 5 years ago, you sent me a thank you note. And I was so stunned to get a handwritten thank you note from the CEO that we put it up on the refrigerator. It meant so much. And since it's been there, you feel like part of our family. And now that you have a problem, we send you our hopes and prayers." Well, Doug has been fine for many years. He runs a leadership institute. But I love that story because it's not why you write thank you notes and it's not why he did that. But it is a reminder that when you send gratitude into the world, it does come back to you. So if I've convinced you that gratitude is important, what do you do? How do you start a gratitude habit? Well, the first thing is, like this little baby here, start with small steps. Don't get overwhelmed. I think people talk about gratitude journals a lot. I'm sure you've read about the need to write a gratitude journal. Well, I kept a gratitude journal for a long time, but I think I'm a writer, so it's okay. I think for a lot of people, the idea of a journal sounds like a lot of work. You don't really want to be writing pages in a journal every night. So here's what I would suggest. Tonight, put a scrap of paper next to your bed and tell yourself that before you go to bed tonight, you're going to write down 1 sentence, 2 words about something that you were grateful for today, something that made you happy. 2 words, who can't do that? So how's that going to happen? How's that going to change things? Well, tomorrow morning, you're going to wake up, you're going to have your first cup of coffee, you're going to say, "Delicious coffee. Oh, I know. I'll be grateful for coffee." Done for the day. And that's okay because you've started your day off with a positive attitude. You've started your day off thinking in a positive way. And that's going to put you in a slightly different mindset. Or it's going to get to be 4 o'clock in the afternoon and you're going to realize that you've had a terrible day. You've not been very happy. And you're going to remember that silly piece of paper that Janice told you to put next to your bed, and you're going to think, what can I possibly write down tonight? So you're going to stop for a minute and you're going to look around and you're going to say, well, I'm grateful to be living in this lovely Riverwoods community with all the supportive people around me. I'm grateful to have friends who I can have dinner with. I'm grateful that it's a sunny day. And once again, you've just taken that moment to turn your perspective around, to think about your day differently. And you're going to think about it again that night when you write it down before you go to bed. And what a lovely gift to yourself to get to go to bed thinking about something positive. There are lots of other ways you can try to start a gratitude habit. One woman I spoke to when I was writing the book told me that whenever she was driving home from work, she would think about all of the terrible things that had gone wrong that day. Once again, the 10 to 1 problem. And by the time she got home, she was just so overwhelmed, she just would have a terrible evening. And she decided to turn that drive home into a drive of gratitude, where she would only think of the good things that had happened that day. Obviously, the problems were going to have to be taken care of, but that's not what she was going to focus on. And I loved that idea of a daily drive of gratitude. If you're walking, maybe there's someplace that you walk every day or someplace that you drive every day that you can use as a reminder to spend that little bit of time, that 10 minutes, thinking about gratitude. Somebody I spoke to told me that every time he turns on the water, he tries to think about being grateful because he knows that water is actually a rare commodity around the world. I thought that was a wonderful idea, but I have to admit I turn on the water a lot in the course of the day. So I turned that into the idea of how about when you're brushing your teeth at night? You know, you have your little electric toothbrush with it's going on for 2 minutes, you're not doing a whole lot else. But isn't that a nice time to be able to stop and say, use that as a reminder, I'm going to spend 2 minutes thinking positively, thinking about good things. If you have grandchildren that you visit, when you're putting them to bed, when you're talking to them, try to take a moment to ask them about something good that happened that day. Once again, the gift that you give yourself at night, you can give to your grandchildren when you read them a story and then you close the book and you say, tell me something good that happened today. Once again, a lovely way for everyone to feel better. One of the great keys to gratitude and to positivity is simply reframing a situation, thinking of it from a different perspective. I like to think of it as quite literally putting a different frame on it. And I thought of that particularly one day when I was in New York and it was a big blizzard and it was in the middle of when I was writing the book. And I was walking, and I expect that where you all live, you have your share of snow and blizzardy days. So you know what it's like. I was walking down the street, on this city street, and I could barely see. And somebody near my apartment was shoveling the excuse me, the sidewalk outside their apartment. And they didn't see me, and they picked up a big shovel and they threw the snow right in my face. I was perhaps not as ladylike in responding to that as I might have been. I was really furious and I marched down the street and I got to the end of the street and I literally stopped. I literally made myself stop. And I thought, wait a minute, I'm the gratitude lady. I can't get that angry and upset. And I thought, yeah, well, how am I supposed to be grateful in this situation? There's a blizzard and I just got thrown a shovel full of snow in my face. And I stood there for a little while and I thought, okay, I'm grateful that he's shoveling and I'm not. I'm grateful that I live in a neighborhood where people actually do shovel the sidewalk. So tomorrow when I'm walking, I'm not going to have to slip. And just those two little small thoughts completely changed how I felt, completely turned my anger into actually something nice. And I must admit that I turned around and I walked back down the street and I called out to the man, thank you for shoveling. And I'm sure he thought I was slightly crazy, but I hope it made him feel a little bit better. It certainly made me feel better. Oftentimes, that reframing is done in your mind just like that, but sometimes it can actually be very, very tangible. I realized that when I was at my sister's house one night for dinner. And my sister is a wonderful cook and a wonderful, wonderful baker. And she had made a chocolate souffle. And after her lovely dinner, I went into the kitchen with her and she took her chocolate souffle out of the oven. And as sometimes happens with chocolate souffles, it sunk. And I said, oh no, Nancy, what are we going to do? You can't serve that. And without batting an eye, she took out some pretty bowls and she scooped the chocolate souffle into the bowls and put whipped cream on the top. And she said, we're not having chocolate souffle, we're having chocolate pudding. And I loved that. And I admired her for that because it also reminded me of how important perspective is. Is your dessert a failure or a success? You get to decide whether it's a fallen souffle or a really delicious chocolate pudding. And I think that realization of reframing and that you can put your own perspective on something is really important to remember in so many situations. You know, as we get older, we all tend to look back on our lives and think of what has been good and what hasn't. And I thought of that in particular when I was talking to a friend of mine who's considerably older than I am, and he had been a television producer. And he, in my mind, was a very successful producer, but he was saying that sometimes he looks back and he thinks, wow, my life was a failure. I did not reach the very top of my career. So many people became so much more famous than I did, and it can really make him unhappy. And then there are other times when he decides to do it differently, and he can say, wow, I had a great career. Look at all the interesting things I've done in my life. Look at all the shows that I'm actually proud of. Look at all the people I've met and the interesting times I've had. And I think it's really interesting to realize that we actually all can do that. We all have a way of looking at our lives in sometimes a positive way and sometimes a negative one. And if you make yourself or help yourself or encourage yourself to tell the story of your life from a positive direction, that's how you're going to see it. And that's how others are going to see it also. Things do go wrong in life, and I'm not pretending that they don't. But gratitude works there too. After I wrote the book, I was talking to a young colleague of mine, and she surprised me by telling me that she had kept a gratitude journal for the last 10 years, and she didn't think she had missed a night. And I was just in awe of that. And as we were talking, she looked at me musingly and she said, now that you're mentioning it, I wonder what I wrote the night I got fired from my job. And I wonder what I wrote the night my mom died. And she went back and she found those journals. She must be very organized. And she actually called me the next day. And she read me the entry she had written the day her mom died. And it said, I'm so grateful that mom had the good life she did, even though it was too short. And I'm so grateful to have my dad and sister with me in this difficult time. And I was incredibly moved by that. I found it incredibly touching because it seemed to me that that is really what gratitude is about. You can't change the event. Of course, she was sad. Of course, she had every reason to be sad and was going to continue to be. But you do have to find a way to move on, and you do have to find a way to move forward. And finding the good is sometimes what allows you to get out of bed the next day and know that there will be a day after also. Sometimes people say to me, well, isn't that just putting on rose-colored glasses? And, you know, I find it very interesting that we sometimes think that being negative is the norm, but being positive is rose-colored glasses. Again, back to that negativity bias. I don't think it's the case at all. I think you're not seeing the world through rose-colored glasses. You're just allowing yourself to see a brighter world, which is really what we all want. Another topic I want to speak to you about briefly is gratitude and health. And we all know that there are body-mind connections, so we shouldn't be too surprised that gratitude improves health. But I have to say, the research on it did surprise me because it was so dramatic on how gratitude lowers stress, it decreases blood pressure, it helps you to sleep better. And one of the big things that the research is showing is that gratitude can reduce the inflammation in your body. Now, if you pay much attention to any of the health news of the last number of years, you know that inflammation is one of the big topics because it's been tied to so many things from migraine headaches to stomach aches to heart problems. And all of us express the stress and the problems in our lives through our bodies in different ways. Some people get stomach aches when they're upset. Some people get migraine headaches. I was somebody who got migraine headaches for many, many years. And when I was working on this book, I met with the medical director, or the then medical director of Canyon Ranch. And he was somebody very involved with studying and working on mind-body connections. And we talked about that. And I told him about my migraine headaches, and we came up with a plan. for how I was going to use gratitude to deal with a headache the next time I got one. And I was actually kind of excited to get a headache for the next time and see if this would work. But in the course of that year, I never got another migraine headache, and they have pretty much not come back since. And I called this doctor at some point towards the end of that year, and I said, "What could be going on?" And he said, "Janice, it makes absolute sense. You're spending every day thinking about gratitude. You're spending every day thinking about positivity. Your stress levels are way down. Your inflammation is way down. That's how your body is responding in a positive way." This is, of course, completely anecdotal. I'm not writing it up for any health journals, but I actually told this story once at a medical meeting where the audience was filled with doctors and other health professionals. And in the Q&A session, one of the doctors stood up and said, "You should write it for a medical journal because we all need to understand better the mind-body connections that we have. And we all need to understand better that some of the things that affect our bodies are in part based on how we think about them and how our minds are working." One of the other great findings in the research is that gratitude dramatically decreases depression. I spoke to a psychiatrist at Mass General Hospital who deals with severely depressed and suicidal patients, many of them hospitalized. And he told me that in his research, he found that writing a letter of gratitude had as much effect on decreasing depression as some of the drugs that he used, that it was one of the most effective treatments that he had. So, how do you do that? And you don't have to be depressed in order to make this work. But the research shows that if you write a letter to somebody from your past, maybe it's the person who gave you your first job, maybe it's a clergy person who was important to you, maybe it's a teacher who you remember, who you never really told how much they made a difference to you. And sit down and in a very specific way, take a couple of paragraphs to tell them why they mattered to you and why what they did was important and changed your life a bit. And then if you can, call them up and read it to them. If not, send it off to them. And the research shows that it's going to make you feel better and more positive about the world and yourself for probably a couple of weeks. And again, that's sort of the magic of gratitude, is that you're not just thanking somebody else, you're really, really helping yourself. So I think what is really important to recognize is that gratitude gives you power. We all know that you face difficult times in your life, face health issues, face family problems, but once you have a tool to deal with them, you can feel stronger. It means that you don't have to wait around to see how things are going to go, but you can say, no matter what happens, I'm going to find the good in it and I'm going to feel better. And that gives you a kind of control over your life that matters so much at a time when many of us are feeling out of control with what's going on with the world. But basically, when people say to you, "Have a good day," as is, just the passing expression that people use, you actually get to say, "I will," because you know that whatever happens, you are going to make sure that it's a good day. Once again, it's your decision. And finally, I want to close by telling you about a quote that I came across from a Benedictine monk who has spent a lot of time writing about gratitude. And he has the wonderful line that it's not happiness that makes you grateful, it's gratitude that makes you happy. It's not happiness that makes you grateful, it's gratitude that makes you happy. And I think that's just a wonderful, wonderful quote to remember, because once again, we think that happiness is the start and that brings about the gratitude. But once we realize that it works the other way around, that being grateful, that finding reasons to be grateful to ourselves, to our children, to the people we work with, to the people we care about, to the people that we see every day and might not remember to thank, that is truly what's going to make us happier. So my thanks to you for sharing this time with me. I am very grateful for that. And I hope as the holidays come up, you will share the gratitude or the gratitude diaries with people you care about. Let them know that you're grateful. It will make a big difference to them, and it'll make a big difference to you too. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. I appreciate that, the review that you did. I was fortunate enough to read your book actually. And so I recognize a lot of the things that you spoke about. At first I want to answer the one question so far, that yes, the entire presentation has been recorded. And so if you joined the event late today, you will be able to have that sent to you, and you'll be able to view the entire presentation. One of the things you said, Janice, is that you can find gratitude, as you're going through your day. You can either find something first thing in the morning, you can find something or grapple for something late at night, just so that you can have that. Is it important to write it down? Because I know, there are probably many people out there. I know I say a nightly prayer, and I pray for all the people who are important to me in my life. And then of course you have things that you think of all your blessings. And so you're kind of thinking about that to yourself before you fall asleep. But is there something to be said for physically writing it down? Does that make a big difference?
Well, first of all, congratulations that you do that. I think that's really wonderful and really lovely, and I hope it makes you feel good every night. I suspect that it does. My idea of using that scrap of paper by your bed to write down just a couple of words is for people who don't necessarily do that, and for people who sometimes find themselves being more negative or more likely to complain about things than to be positive about things. One nice thing, once you move beyond the scrap of paper, if you do want to get a pretty little notebook, it doesn't have to be that you write down something long every day. But if you jot down a few things, one of the good things that happens with that is that it gives you a record. So on those days that you're feeling particularly terrible, or as I mentioned, sometimes you're looking at your life and looking at all the negative things rather than the positive, if you have that journal that you've kept, even if it's just a few words that you've scribbled down, it allows you to go back and say, wow, that was good. Wow, that was lovely. Yeah, somebody did care about me. Yes, I am grateful to that person for what they did. And by the way, it's one of the advantages of writing the gratitude letter also, because it sort of reminds you that you're a person who is worthy of somebody doing something nice for. And writing it down, I think, allows you to go back and look at it and remind yourself of the good things that happen. I think the goal is to be able to do that change of perspective and that reframing on the fly without having to write it down. And I think once you practice that enough and get to that point, then then maybe again, if the journal is fun for you to do and you like the idea of going back to it, great. Gratitude should never be a chore. You should never feel like this is something I have to do. Excuse me. Forgive me, because that's going to keep you from doing it.
Sure. That's a great idea. One of our participants has a specific question on how do you express gratitude for injustices? So there are a lot of things on the news, every day that we see that we find to be injustices. And how do you get around that with gratitude?
I think what I would suggest is that if there is something you can do, go out and do it. Gratitude is not saying that you should just sit back and say everything is great, not by any means. If there's a protest that you want to join, if there's a letter you want to write, if there's a march you want to be part of, or a social media conversation you want to be in, anything that you think you can do to change the world, to change something you care about, go ahead and do it. Absolutely. I think where gratitude helps is where you can't do things sometimes, or where things aren't changing in the way that you would want them to. And certainly we're all in that position. And it doesn't mean that the gratitude that you express has to be for the things that you think are wrong. Maybe your gratitude is for the people who are out there trying to change them, or for the people who are taking the positions that you care about. Yeah, I just think that supporting that and being grateful to the people who are speaking out, it is one way of helping with that. And certainly in times of upheaval, in times when things are going badly, getting a perspective, however you can, sometimes helps. Um, and uh, yeah, I was talking to somebody last night who was saying that with wars raging now, and we're all, many of us are feeling like this is the worst the world has ever been. And he said, you know what I did? I watched a movie about World War II. And I decided, you know what? Actually, there are ways to get through things, and let's be grateful that we're not in that position just yet. And I think if we can somehow try to have bigger perspectives, sometimes it does help also.
That's great advice. Well, you're getting a lot of gratitude here in these comments. Thank you, Janice. Just ordered 2 of your books on Amazon. We are grateful for your insights. Another participant said, thank you for this wonderful presentation. It's a great reminder that there's always something to be grateful for. Her sister has a great saying that says, if you can't find a silver lining, then stitch one in.
That's great. That's lovely.
Someone is asking actually if you have a podcast, because your presentation is so wonderful.
Thank you. You know, I did do a podcast during in the early days of COVID. iHeartMedia had come to me and asked me to do a podcast, and I think you can still find them. I was doing a daily, just under 10 minutes. It was sort of just a daily to positive way to start your day, and I did it for just about a year. So I think you can still find them on Apple Podcasts, but it was starting to take over my life, and so I stopped doing it. I sometimes regret that I did, because it was actually kind of nice for me to think about something new and different and positive every day. But yes, I think you can still find those episodes.
Okay. Well, I have another question too about your year-long journey through this. You had a very supportive family and supportive husband through this, who was really willing to help you through kind of, get through the year and figure out how to improve each day. And what happens if you have people around you who are kind of, they're not really that supportive. They don't understand why you're being so grateful and so positive all the time. Maybe they don't feel that way. And it maybe starts to annoy them more than feel good themselves. How do you navigate through that if it's something you're trying to do for yourself?
It's a great question, and I think there are a couple of different approaches to it. One is that you're absolutely right. I was using gratitude to go from what was a very good life to an even better one, and I'm very well aware of that. And I have been odd in the years since the book came out, when I would do talks, and they used to be in person, and people would come up to me afterwards and tell me about really terrible situations that had happened in their lives, and terrible family problems, illness, death, and how they had used gratitude to get through. And I was always awed by that and quite moved by it. And it was a big reminder to me that, yes, it is very powerful, no matter what kind of circumstance you're in. Having people who are supportive of what you're doing, of course, I agree. I think, though, that if you're grateful to somebody, and if you say thank you to somebody and you appreciate somebody, and they don't express appreciation back at some point, or it doesn't feel positive, I'm not sure they should be in your life necessarily. But I do know how frustrating it is. I will tell you, my mom, who is no longer with us, was not a positive person, and she was a person who bonded by complaining, as so many people do. People like to say, oh, isn't it terrible weather today? And then everybody agrees what terrible weather it is. And I've always tried to turn that around. When somebody says, isn't it terrible weather today? I'll say, I just bought this new scarf and they're only $10 on the corner. I highly recommend it. It's so great to have a warm scarf. And then people will talk to you about your warm scarf because really all people are trying to do is bond with you or bond or find a way to converse. And somehow we've become used to doing that over complaining. And I think it's a surprise if you take that effort when somebody is negative or somebody seems to not be a grateful person and you model the positivity and you say something positive, very, very often they will respond. I talk in the book about a very close friend of mine who was also a very negative person, and it was driving me crazy. And I was writing this book, and I could barely talk to her for a while. And I told her what the issue was, and it sort of became a joke between us. And she hasn't necessarily changed her views or her abilities, but she recognizes it now. So when we're talking and she starts being negative about something and I will point it out to her, she'll laugh and she'll say, "You're right. Okay, what do I say instead?" And so if you can be a little bit lighthearted about it and try to help somebody to see that maybe things will feel better, it's not always easy. And I agree, when you don't have somebody who is playing the game the way you are, it can be a challenge. But I think it's worth the try.
I have a friend who used to tell us all these bad stories, and after the third one, we'd say, "Okay, now you have to tell us a good story."
Absolutely, absolutely perfect.
It's
Yes.
very easy in New England to talk about the weather and practice positivity with other people because we're either talking about it being too hot or too cold.
Right. Well,
Um,
I grew up outside Boston, so I know what you
so you know what
mean.
we're talking about. One of our other participants said that it was a great presentation. I'm a person that strongly believes in saying thank you or writing a handwritten thank you note or an email based upon time well done. So we wish that more people would follow your lead in that, but it's a very good idea to think about that, to write a letter. It does mean a lot to people, even if it's a quick one.
Right. And I think so often social media has made negativity and anger the currency of the day. And to respond to something positively, to find a way to say thank you, to say that's great, to say I really appreciate that you did that. I find sometimes when you do that, when you're in a store, you get so much more than you deserve from the small response because people are not used to hearing somebody say, thank you, or I really appreciate your helping me with that. Or I said to the person at the grocery store the other day after he checked me out, I said, "Wow, thank you for being so fast. That was really wonderful." And he said, "Oh, really? Do you want me to help you get your groceries to your car?" And so, people are surprised and pleased when you notice them, and it changes how they respond to you also.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah, that's people want to be near people who are positive. You're talking about technology. Is it, you think, more important or more impactful to write a handwritten note, or would an email of appreciation be just as good?
Yeah, you know what? I think things have changed enough that emails are very much the way that people do communicate. And it's still sometimes nice to get a handwritten note, but I also notice that it takes a long time to get those, right? By the time somebody writes it and sends it to you, I'm perfectly happy if on something small, if somebody sends me a thank you note by an email or gets in touch with me to say something nice about my book or something that they've heard. I'm thrilled to get those emails. So I think we've become accustomed enough to emails that works very well too. I think in the story I told about the CEO, he was at Campbell's probably 20 years ago now, and he was there for 10 years. So that still gives us a gap. And maybe part of it though was that the surprise of people getting a handwritten note did help then. But yeah, I think you can get away just fine with an email. I'm still unsure about texts, but
Yeah.
maybe that just shows my age.
I'm still happy when I go to my mailbox and instead of finding in the midst of all those pieces of cardboard and ads and things like that, I get an actual note from somebody. That's always an exciting day
Good,
for me. So I
good.
um, let's see. Another person wrote, "What a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much for your inspiration and for brightening my day." The other one is, I find the more you practice gratitude, the easier it gets. You get a parking space, you drop something and it doesn't break. You find something you've lost. It sounds something like you've written as well in your book. The more you do it, it seems the easier it comes. Is that true? You're kind of training your brain.
I think so, absolutely. As I said, those neural circuits get used to whatever it is that you do. But sometimes there are still times that you have to make yourself do it. Or, as you pointed out, I'm lucky enough to have a partner who will often remind me. And we were sitting in traffic a couple of weeks ago, and it was terrible traffic, and there had obviously been an accident far up ahead, and I was grumbling about sitting here and I hate traffic. And my husband, sort of mockingly, knowing that I write about gratitude, said, "And we're so grateful that we weren't the people in the accident." And, he was joking, but I went, "You're right. You're absolutely right. Their day is a lot worse than mine." And, just sometimes those little reminders to yourself or to others can put, again, a situation that you're not able to do anything about in a different perspective.
That's so true. I'm just curious about the way you wrote your book. I know you're a writer, so you probably have an outline that you start with. But did this gratitude journey go organically? Did you start with, just little things about being grateful, bringing your family into it, then bringing, your finances and your day to day into it, and then finally ending with, caring, connecting, bringing it forward in a larger scale? Was it an organic thing for you as you thought your way through the year, or did you end up kind of putting your chapters together based on your research?
Well, I had started with that very big national survey that we had done. So I did have a point of reference, and I had done a lot of research on gratitude before I got the idea of starting the year. But then once it happened, I actually was very much living the year and writing it at the same time. So I did that first month with my husband, did the research on that, called all the people while that was going on, wrote that chapter, and then moved on. And by the way, I had decided when I was started with my husband that 1 month of being grateful to him was going to be more than enough. But it worked so well that that part of the gratitude lasted for the whole year, and hopefully has continued in the years since.
That's great. And have you continued it throughout your life? I mean, is it something that's just so natural to you, or do you have your bad days?
Well, we all have our bad days, of course, but it does help me enormously because, as I was saying before, it gives you a way to get through bad days, and it gives you a way to get some perspective and to shrug your shoulders at certain things and say, "Okay, that's not what I wanted, but here's the good part of that," or "Here's something else good that's going to happen." And yes, it has become a really important part of my life and of how I function and of how I think about things. And I think it's passed along to my children also. And I do think that that positive attitude is a gift that you pass along to additional generations, and is really a wonderful thing to be able to give them.
Well, I thank you so much. You have a few more here, people thanking you, all feeling very inspired to go on and read your book and take a year to do the same. So I thank you so much for all of your insights and your wonderful stories.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thanks for all the good questions and the kind words, which I really do appreciate. And I do have a website. If anybody has a question or wants to get in touch with me, there's a contact page there, and I